Hi there. In this lecture, I'm going to introduce to you some of the basic concepts and ideas behind this course. In this class, we are going to be looking at art the way art historians do, through what we call visual analysis. In many cases, I'll be asking you to look at and analyze work before you fully understand what it is. In this way, I like to call this putting the art before the course, meaning really looking, trying to understand what you see and making sense of it through a visual analysis. So, to begin with, what can be learned from a picture just by looking at it? Not a whole lot. In our visual analysis, we will in part be looking for clues to help us decipher what we're seeing that will allow us a kind of deeper insight into the significance of the work. Okay? Now, to begin with, I often refer to what we're looking at as an image because, well, we really don't know what we're looking at here. But in fact, it's actually a vessel, okay? It's a ceramic vessel. And so this are our first sort of indications of what it is. We can see that it's molded by hand, it's shaped, and there are a number of distinctive designs and patterns. There's kind of a larger pattern that is sort of rope-like, and kind of bulges off the surface in semi-ornate ways. And then there are finer, more delicate inscriptions that are closer to the surface. We can see the way these different patterns are sort of interlocking and fitted together in a very novel way. There's kind of a decorative edge to the uppermost part, and we can see shapes and forms that are sort of biomorphic. Perhaps something like a dragonfly, perhaps something like a tool, but we're not quite sure if there's any symbolic or meaning to this. We're just sort of annotating and looking at the shapes and the designs. We also notice that there's this very sort of ornate and elaborate upper part to the vessel, which means it doesn't look terribly functional. There might be a ceremonial part to this as well, meaning it's used for some special occasion. It's not there's a certain impracticality to the design of the pot. So these are all just sort of basic observations we can tell by just looking at it. It's not a whole lot. We don't know how old it is. We don't know who made it. We don't know why it was made or what it meant to the people who made it. So these are a lot of questions that we'll need to investigate further by finding out about this in relation to other objects that may be out there. So the first kinds of information we need is the primary information. Who were the artists who made this? What did they call these things? When was it made? What was it made of? Where does this exist today? Where was it originally found? Okay, so by looking at it, we might be able to tell the materials. We think it's ceramic, okay? That's just because of how it appears in the image. It would, of course, be a lot easier to tell if you could actually see the object. But not a whole lot more than that can be deduced just by looking at it. So we need to start doing some research. We're looking through our textbook, we're looking through our readings, our lectures, and maybe we turn to Google. So we look through ceramic, and we know this is taking place in Japan, and we know it's probably old, its design and characteristic, and then we find out that this kind of ceramics would be called Jomon period ceramics. Jomon referring to this kind of rope braid texture that can be found on these pots. Okay, and we see lots of examples of these which look very similar to what we have in our picture, we may actually even see the very example. Now, there are hundreds and hundreds of these Jomon pots out there, so we may not find it exactly the one, but we'll certainly see lots of others, and we may be able to get an idea of who made this, when it was made, and how it was made by beginning to do a little bit of investigation. One of the first things we're going to start to look for are terms that we can use to describe what we're seeing. And a very key term to this particular vessel is the idea of Shinto, which are the ancient animistic beliefs of the Japanese people, and that this vessel was used in special Shinto rites. So this word Shinto becomes a very important way in which we can start looking at this and comparing it to other things that are equally old or even more recent things, and to see if there's any kind of connection or continuity between the way in which these ideas of Shinto have been practiced in Japan. So with that kind of information, we can start to make a comparison. So outside identifying the unique work of art, we're going to start to look for similar types of work that is done in a similar genre for a similar function, things that were done in a similar historic period, things that were done with a similar style, and certainly within the purview of Japan and the purview of Shinto. So we'll look at different kinds of Japanese ceramics, and we'll start to see different aesthetic concerns and ideas that have evolved in Japan, and how can we make sense of them? We say, well, which one came first? Did this idea influence that idea? How did it influence them? Were the people who made this aware of what was made before? Did they use or borrow some of those ideas in this new vessel, in this new work? And so these are the kinds of comparisons we're going to start to look at in a much more broad context. We try and make sense of, comparisons over an even longer period of time. So these are the last sort of category we need to concern ourselves with, things that are broadly similar to many different kinds of work. Aesthetic influences and ideas, symbolic themes, visual patterns that may have carried over for hundreds of years. Now, their meaning may have changed, but there might be a kind of connection to this past that has been continued in the art of today. So, lastly, we should be able to make a kind of chronology. Which is the older work? How did these ideas evolve over time? And what do these different objects say about their respective times in relationship to each other? This is a very important part of the class. It's not just identifying individual works of art, but being able to make meaningful comparisons between them. Okay? I'll talk more about comparisons later. But first, now I want to talk about some of the assignments that will be going on in this class. To begin with, in a couple of weeks, you will be asked to do 5 definitions. I'll give you a list of about 20 or so terms. The terms will be concepts or ideas or names of cultures or historic periods, and then you will explain what they are in about 80 to 100 words, and then you will find an example and describe how that example is related to the term. It's very important that you not only give the example, but that you say how that example suits the term. Okay, so these are ways in which the definition. There'll be more information about this assignment later, but just to give you an idea of the kinds of things you're going to do. This one assignment is really only going to be about a page and a half in length. Next, we have the image identification, and in the image identification, you will choose one image from our image collection. And these examples that I'm asking you for are all from these image collections. And in the image collection, the images are only identified by a random code, and that you will need to sort of investigate what these images are through your readings, through the lectures, or through your own deductions, and then you'll be able to use these images in your assignments. And so in this case here, you'll choose one of the images from the collection and you'll describe it. As we did earlier, we'll look at the primary, the secondary, and the tertiary, different kinds of information to give a full, complete description of what we're looking at. And then you'll make a comparison of that image to other images in the image collection. So you can talk not just about it, but how it relates to other images from the same time or from later periods in our history. Lastly, after 5 weeks, we have an exam on the section. And in it will be a combination of a number of things we've already done. We'll have 5 terms, and you will choose 3 of the 5 terms to define. You will have 4 images that I will choose, and you will choose 2 of the 4 images to write an essay about. And then finally, there'll be essay questions. There'll be 3 essay questions, and you will write essays for 2 of the 3 questions. In each of these, you'll be asked to give examples from the image collection and to demonstrate your understanding of the course content and be able to identify accurately these images in the image collection. So take some time and become familiar with the image collection and check in regularly as you are learning the content and make notes about which images apply to different ideas as the course progresses. Lastly, we have the research essay, the electronic writing portfolio essay. And this essay can be submitted for completion of that requirement for the university if that is needed. It has 3 parts. First, a proposal where you tell me which topic you wish to write about. Then you'll create an outline showing the order in which you will discuss the images in your proposal topic. And then finally, your final paper. Paper is really about 900 to 1,200 words. It's not a very long paper, but it's a chance for you to choose a topic that you find interesting and begin to investigate it further and do some original research. So, my general advice to you, always make sure you accurately record the image code from the image collection in your writings. This will be the one way that I know that you really understand what you're talking about. So the image codes are accurately cited. I can check and see the images. You don't need to include the original images in your essays, just the code, and then I can be able to see that you understand what you're talking about. In this quote here, you can see a sentence where someone is using a code to demonstrate that they understand what we're talking about. So looking closely at the bronze vessel, RCEJ, you can see multiple beast masks or tauti in the design. So the code RCEJ is kind of an example of how you can use those codes in your essays and in your definitions and in your exam as a way of kind of demonstrating what you're talking about. All right? Your answers should not include quotes, and it's always best to paraphrase to demonstrate that you understand the material. Put it in your own words. Be sure to thoroughly paraphrase your answers so that you're similarity to content that you are reading is not in any way identical. Okay? All right. So a very important idea in this class is to look, observe, and learn and think critically about what you're seeing visually.